Welcome to this month's sex stream. I apologize for my lighting. It looks like I'm having like a seance over here, but we're approaching the dead of winter and it's 3 p.m. and the sun has set. So, and I didn't set up my big lights. So here we are. But anyway, really excited to get into this topic today. So this is going to be the first of a two-part series on relationship structures, and the next will be on polyamory, and we're hoping to have a panel discussion for that and to get some very, very cool polyamorous people on the chat for that. So stay tuned. But for this one, we're going to talk all about monogamy. And so we're going to talk about, we're going to start with a critique of the institutionalization of monogamy, and specifically monogamous marriage in the West in particular, and how extremely sexist that history is and the issues that persist today. We're also going to give an overview of some of the reasons that leftists want to quote unquote abolish the family and what that means to us. But we're also going to follow this with a passionate defense of people being able to still choose to have whatever relationship structure that feels good to them, whether that be monogamy or not. Just especially on the left, I think we've all had some very weird experiences and experienced some very strange pressure to perhaps override our own boundaries and our own preferences in the name of being more quote unquote progressive, being a real leftist, being more evolved as just a person, you know. So we're going to dig into all of that. So I just wanted to start by giving some insight into how this topic came about, like how we decided to talk about this. So it all started when Catherine here, dear Catherine, posted a really good quote in our WhatsApp group where we just talk back and forth and send voice notes to each other back and forth. So I'm going to read it. It's from Tom Rasmussen from First Comes Love, and it is: monogamy is a system which demands that we prioritize one another or one other so that the state doesn't have to prioritize us. Monogamy, and by large marriage, is a niftily constructed system which allows those in charge to neatly organize those that the state should care for. Marriage eases the state's responsibility to you. It means that when you get old, you'll have someone to care for you, or when you have a baby, there will be people to take care of it. Thus, we can work for each other, protect each other, nurse each other when we get old, all in our neat family units, and then we die, and the state hasn't had to do all that much to take care of its people. That's why non-monogamy is so frowned upon in a social sense. And so I responded by agreeing with this largely, and we're going to dive deeper, as I said, into the history of monogamous marriage to kick this off. And I also wanted to give a shameless plug for the podcast episode I did with Kristen Godsey, which I've linked in the description box below. It's called Love and Sex in a Capitalist Hellscape, Decommodifying Our Relationships. And we really dig into all of this there. So I was like, I agree with the sentiment of this quote, and I agree with the points that it's making. But I also feel like when we have these discussions, I feel like it's important to distinguish what we mean when we say monogamy, because even with the conversation that I had with Kristen Godsey, she was using the word monogamy oftentimes as a stand-in for this imposed institutionalization of monogamy on a societal scale, and particularly monogamous marriage, right? And I think it's very, very important to critique that, and I'm here to critique it all day, and I'm here to critique monogamy in general all day. But the institutionalization of it, and the way that it's been forced on people in society, is a different thing than just two people in a relationship choosing what boundaries feel right to them, right? And so, like, I can agree with a thing like that, but then at the same time, I mean, I'm pregnant right now. I'm currently engaged to be married to a man in a monogamous relationship. And for me, there isn't really a tension there, but I can see, like, there could be a tension. And I think that, just for clarity and especially in a lot of these leftist spaces where there can be kind of these weird pressures on what structure to adopt. I just wanted to be clear on that. So I said that in a voice note, and then it just kicked off like hours and hours of, of back and forth voice notes on this topic. And we were like, this would be a great stream. So here we are. Do either to add to that?
No, I think you covered it quite well. And, this is the birthing story of most of our streams is, what do we talk about behind the scenes? What gets our juices flowing? And then we're like, let's take this public. And I think, I guess to add to that, one of the things that Mexi and I specifically felt was kind of important about this stream is we wish this was information we had heard when we were younger, which I think, again, is also a common theme with most of our streams is like, what do I wish I had heard when I was a teenager or in my early 20s? And
Yeah.
I think, yeah, a nuanced conversation about monogamy would have been really helpful earlier in my journey
Mhm.
of, becoming a more radical leftist and kind of figuring out what worked for me. So I think that's a big point of our purpose here today, and will also be a big point of what we want to do on the polyamory stream as well.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that all sounds good to me. I have nothing to add.
Okay, perfect. So let's dive into the critique. Lest this be perceived as a stream of just, a bunch of fragile monogamous people who are trying to defend their choices. There is a lot to critique. So, again, a lot of this I'm drawing from my talk with Kristen Godsey, and she also referenced David Graeber and David Wengrow's book, The Dawn of Everything, looking at, obviously different societies throughout history. Um, but we're going to focus on the West today because we're in the West. And so in the West, monogamous marriage is often traced back to ancient Greece, where you had very young girls being married off to much older men. And the institution's main purpose was to secure the sexual fidelity of the woman in that situation. And again, this is, obviously very cis hetero because it's, an institution that's a hallmark of the cis hetero patriarchy. So it is very much like man, woman gets married. And so the whole point was to secure the sexual fidelity of the woman so that she could produce heirs that could be traced patrilineally for the transfer of the wealth and property of the father to his sons, and usually the firstborn son. So it's therefore very, very tied with societies that were patriarchal specifically, but also patrilineal, and that practice patrilocality. So patrilineality basically means that the family line is traced through the father, and we still have that today. It still, bothers me to no end today that women in hetero monogamous marriages still take the name of their husbands. And again, like if that's a choice that you've made, like that's fine. It just like for me, it's hard for me to dissociate that from this really sexist history where women were the property of their fathers and then the property of their husbands, and then of course the kids also take the father's name because they are by consequence also the property of the father of the household. um, and then so patrilocality is where when two people get married in this kind of cishet monogamous system, the woman would be the one to leave her kin group and go and join the family of the man. So basically just, cutting her off from all of her social ties and just putting her in this new situation where it's like, yeah, she's there to serve the man and, the family basically. Um, but it's important to note that, not all societies were patriarchal or patrilineal or practiced patrilocality. There were many that were matrilineal and practiced matrilocality where things looked very different. And there were also, other societies that were patriarchal where, I guess there would be polygamy, not necessarily polyandry, but, anyway. So yes, very patriarchal, also tied with private property, obviously, because since the dawn of private property, especially in agricultural societies, men who owned land and owned the means of production then wanted to have a way, like, a system to ensure that they knew who their legitimate heirs were in order to be able to pass on their wealth and their land and whatever. Um, and so the sexual fidelity of the woman mattered in that case because if she was allowed to have multiple partners and the man didn't know, is this child mine, then they would, they would be able to pass on all this wealth and private property to that son. Um, and the Catholic Church apparently had a big stake in this because typically, second-born sons wouldn't inherit anything, or maybe they wouldn't inherit as much. And so second-born sons would often join the church. And so if the firstborn son were to die, then the wealth and property would transfer to the second son and therefore to the church. So they also had a stake, like a financial stake, in imposing monogamous marriage on society. And in Caliban and the Witch, Federici also talks about the transition between feudalism and capitalism, and how, similarly, women were needed to be subjugated for that to happen, and their bodies needed to be made into these machines of social reproduction to feed capitalism. And she talks about different times where, in places in Europe, the population had plummeted due to famine or diseases or things like that. And in that situation, when there was less workers, the workers actually had more power, more collective power with respect to the owners of the means of production. And so obviously that couldn't happen. So there was these, the elites, the ruling classes would push for higher birth rates. And there were a bunch of laws and incentives that, again, would basically make women into just like these birthing machines to serve capital and patriarchy. And then, throughout history, like in these patriarchal societies, ensuring the fidelity of the woman was made possible by inequality, basically. So the fact that women were not able to inherit wealth or property, and the fact that they also couldn't really earn it, meant that they needed to be married off in order to survive. So it was just something that was transactional for them. And then in a lot of societies, there was also, like a bride price or a dowry. So just really cementing the idea that like women who were not married were kind of a financial burden to the family. Or a prize to be bought, but it was all very kind of like an economic transaction, basically. But the inequality is what basically, ensured this system worked. And it's extremely sexist, of course, because the man in the equation did not have to be faithful to the woman. He could have extramarital affairs. And even until pretty recently, marriage laws allowed for men to divorce their wives if the wives were unfaithful, but not the other way around. It was actually very difficult for women to have grounds for divorce. And then, of course, with the inequality that they were suffering and the fact that they were economically dependent on their husbands, how could they even survive if they were to divorce their partners? And so, this was imposed through laws and incentives and things like that. And then also on, different societies through colonialism. However, I did want to note that, there were different kind of forms of this all over the world as well. And especially in patriarchal societies, not in matrilineal societies, but I just want to say that it's not like it was directly imposed necessarily through colonialism, all the time. But so even today, there's still laws in many places against polyamory. There's still tax breaks for people to get into, cishet monogamous, or I guess, they're now legalizing gay marriage as well, but there's still tax breaks in order to get people into monogamous marriage structures. And we still exist under patriarchy and capitalism. So that inequality still exists. And in her book, Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism, Kristen Godsey explains that this inequality that persists still leads many women to basically view marriage as a transaction, right? And, also just leads a lot of women to stay in very abusive and unfulfilling relationships due to just economic necessity. So that's basically the the short rundown of that history. So we can see that there's, some very sexist, very problematic aspects to all of this that should not be celebrated. I don't know if either of you want to comment or jump in with anything.
I don't think so right now. I think that was a really, really good overview and just something very important to keep in mind as we're going through everything we're going to talk about today. And, I think for the reasons you said, also for supplying bodies for the military,
Mm,
this is probably a large reason why, for instance, in the United States, where I live, we just had our right to abortion overturned
mhm,
by our Supreme Court. And so when we're talking about these things, like today, we're going to be tackling this more from, we're going to eventually tackle this from the individual perspective of like what I choose for myself.
mhm,
But I think it's really good to keep this information in mind as you're kind of looking at the world around you and looking at what's being passed via legislation. Like Mexi mentioned, right now, for a lot of countries, gay marriage is possible, but that is also under threat. I know here in the US specifically, that's been said to be something that the Supreme Court is considering overturning. So I think it's really good to keep these things in mind of why these things might be occurring, just so you can have a better perspective and understanding on why these things are under attack in the first place.
mhm.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that was an amazing overview. I don't have anything to add.
No worries. Yeah, I have got a lot of just a lot of history to go through before we get to our individual thoughts. Um, but anyway, yeah, that's a great point about reproductive rights and the rights of LGBTQ people to marry, etc. And I mean, still, yeah, like if you're polyamorous, I mean, in most places, I think you're not gonna be able to marry multiple people and have that be respected.
Right.
Yeah.
And even family structures, if you are part of a throuple or part of a community where you take care of children as if they were your own, you don't have any rights to those children, and not
Mhm.
in terms of ownership, but like more in terms of having a say in their healthcare, being able to, pick them up if something happens, et
Mhm.
cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of ways in which being queer or having non-monogamous relationship structures really challenges this idea of the nuclear family, which is intended to relieve a burden from the state, but is also intended to make us feel very isolated
Mhm.
and very dependent on the people that we choose to partner with.
Mhm.
Whereas when you see other structures and other ways of relating to one another, even in, non-white communities, BIPOC communities, people who have maintained their culture, there's just such a huge culture of community. And it's very common to see people, living with cousins or just having a much bigger support system. And that is very threatening to the state because the state wants us to feel like we're alone and like we have no options.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Like here, there's definitely a lot of immigrants from different parts of the world will come, and it's very typical for them to live in multi-generational households.
Mhm.
But then in some areas, they're instituting laws and just like bylaws and things like that to make it so that like only so many people could live in a house, or only so many, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um,
Yep.
just prevent that, and it's like, okay,
Even
goddamn,
my apartment, they're like, "This is single occupancy only."
yeah,
And I'm like, "2 people could fit in here."
yeah.
It would be tight, but, like,
Hmm.
it's wild to me how high the housing rates are here and the
Yes,
rental market is, and, like, I'm not even allowed to share this with someone,
exactly.
if
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wanted to.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
it is ridiculous.
And the houses here are huge. I mean, the new houses they're building are huge. But
Yeah.
anyway, I think that's a good segue into the concept of abolishing the family.
Yeah.
So yeah, you'll often hear this phrase on the left. And again, I think it's one that we should be like rather precise about what we're talking about. So I'll just give some of the reasons why. I mean, we already talked a bit about how the individual family unit serves the state and allows them, basically it's kind of like a neoliberal kind of mechanism, allowing them to just kind of roll back and not provide services, not socialize care. But there are a few other things. So often in the like cis hetero monogamous individual family unit, social reproduction, or the labor that goes along with social reproduction, falls onto women or people with wombs. Yeah, Pia says anarchist's favorite thing, abolishing stuff. Yeah, abolish it all.
We love it.
But yeah, I mean, it's no secret that the labor for social reproduction, or the labor of care in the home, usually falls to the woman. And there's been a lot written by Marxist feminists about the double burden that women face in this respect, especially if they have to work and then also take on the labor of social reproduction. And because, again, of like patriarchal and capitalist inequality, where often the man in a cis hetero couple will be earning more than the woman, and just societal expectations in general. If they have a child together, then typically the person to forfeit their career will be the woman, or the person with the womb. And so they'll end up taking parental leave, and then at that point they will become even more economically dependent on their partner, which itself can foster abuse and negative dynamics in relationships. But then there's a bunch of other consequences. So like, because employers know that women or people with wombs are often the ones who will need to take time off to raise children, many can be reluctant to hire them. They can lose out on advancements for that reason. There just really aren't a lot of accommodations that are available for parents in general, but especially for women. And again, in her book, Kristen Gotzi goes over a lot of examples of the ways that this kind of manifests for people, and the way that a lot of employers view women in the job market as just like ticking time bombs, basically, or just like huge liabilities that they'll have to pay for. So they often don't, take chances on them, and things like that. And so in that situation, again, like if you have that economic disparity, then that can lead to, again, like abusive, unfulfilling relationships. And if you think about it, like, okay, so like I said, I'm pregnant right now. I'm going to be giving birth at the end of the year. And I've been talking about this with one of my friends. In about 5 years' time, I'm going to be in the same position that she's in. She has a son who's 6. And so he's in school, and she's kind of thinking, I mean, she's pregnant now too, so she's going to be taking more time off. But she's like, well, like, what can I do? Like, how can I go back to work? Because the drop off and pickup times for school, it's like you drop them off at 8 something, but you have to pick them up at 3. So she's like, what kind of a full-time job can I get where they're going to just let me leave every day to get my kid at 3? It's just not possible. So then it's like, you either have to just work part-time or figure something out, or again, just not work and like rely on your partner, which again, just creates that imbalance. And then just a lot of all of that responsibility, again, falling to women.
Or get cheap domestic labor, which
Yes.
then pushes that burden even further on like the global South.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. So having this like individual unit as the main unit for raising kids creates so many problems. And then it's just a lot of stress on people, because then it's like, in that situation, if only one partner is able to work, I mean, like, you can barely pay for housing with 2 people working right now. So how are you going to pay for a family on one income, or one income and then like one person working part-time? So you're just like desperately, again, just like in kind of the rat race. There's a lot of stress that comes along with that. There's not enough help. So yeah, I mean, I think it really does take a village. I think that abolish the family, it's like we should expand our idea of the family to include the wider community. We should completely socialize care work. We should completely socialize the work of social reproduction. So like, absolutely, these are incredibly important things to talk about. But then equally, I feel like the phrase itself is just kind of like this edgy phrase that gets thrown out. And I think for the most part, people mean what I mean, like what I've just explained. But I've definitely, again, had some quite weird conversations, or just listened to people talk about this like in podcasts and other things, where I'm like, wait, are we talking about the same thing? Because it's like, some people will take that a step further to be like, no, like, in the communist utopia, in the commune, everyone will be polyamorous. And then, you know, nobody will know who their quote unquote father is, or nobody will know who the non-birthing parent is. And everything will be so, you know, and I'm just like, yeah, can we just have like a majority of people maybe doing that? But like, I can still choose if I want to just have kids with one person at a time and like still have those, you know,
no, Mexi, you're not allowed.
Like, am I just like kicked out of the commune or what? Like,
oh my God, you got to socialize that pussy for communism.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
That womb, you just got to bust it open for everybody.
Yeah.
Andrew made a good comment and said, honestly, the term I'd rather use in regard to changes to how families work, and I would say to how most of the structures we say we want to abolish is liberation, rebuilding, or expansion.
Yes.
And I agree. I think there's a lot, there's things that should be abolished, like the patriarchy and capitalism, but I think there's a lot of stuff that in and of itself, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just how it's been weaponized by the state is the problem. So liberating families, I think, sounds really beautiful and is, I think, what most people mean when they say abolish the family.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's less scary to people who may not be as radicalized yet. And also is less aggressive towards people like us, where it's like, well, we may want something that looks like a, quote unquote, traditional family structure, but we're also not trying to replicate the harms of the state.
Mm-hmm.
With that, we are still finding ways to expand what that means within our communities.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. Great.
Yeah.
Comment.
Thank you. He says, I'm abolishing the word abolish. So very
no
here
more,
for that.
No more abolishing anything.
Yes.
It's like it's like an essay or something. It's like every time you use the word abolish, you have to find a synonym for it or something else.
Yeah. And I like rebuilding or expansion, because then it's actually
Yeah.
focusing on the work that we need to do instead of just tearing down and then like, well, now what, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, Max, to your point too, it's like, yeah, sometimes you have these conversations, you think you're on the same page, and then it takes a dark turn.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, like, in the vegan spaces, I know specifically, but I think in a lot of leftist spaces, there's like so many anti-natalists. Is that the term for it?
Yes.
And it's like, yeah, just taking shit way too fucking far, which is, I think, what a lot of people do with these leftist ideologies is, they're frameworks and they're jumping off points for conversation, but they're not everything's to be taken so literally. Like abolishing, abolishing something doesn't mean like, okay, we're abolishing the family so no one can have kids anymore. Like that's way too far. Or, we've decided we shouldn't eat animals, so now we have to not have any people because those people might grow up to eat animals one day, or
that
we want to save
always
the environment.
Like made me crazy.
Oh my God. And part of why we wanted to talk about monogamy was we've heard similar things with monogamy and polyamory as well in the vegan community. Like, oh, you can't be vegan if you're monogamous because you're putting your partner in a cage. And it's like, okay, you need to relax. Like that is taking stuff just way too far. So I think embracing nuance and still understanding that like a lot of stuff that's weaponized by capitalism works because there is something inherently good about it to a lot of us. Like the concept of family, this liberated concept of family, I think to most people is really nice and is something that we want, right? Like inherently we want to have that kind of community, but capitalism and the patriarchy takes these things and perverts them and weaponizes them against us. So yeah, a lot of the stuff we don't necessarily need to abolish, which would sound really sad to a lot of people. It's just that we need to liberate it from these really harmful systems that have used it against us.
Yeah, Pia says that I think abolishing is mostly more about the reinforcement of the thing through the state, societal norms, etc. So abolishing the reinforcement. And it's like, yeah, exactly. Let's abolish the forced institutionalization of this thing, which is so harmful.
Yeah.
And like the forced adoption of this thing by everyone. But like, let's not then like flip it to like, well, now everyone has to be this other thing, or they're not progressive. They're not in the commune. But yeah, so I'm glad that you brought up the vegan thing, because that was definitely one thing that I was going to share. Because yeah, so this was me. This was several years ago now. I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship, and I was like slowly trying to get back into things. I was like testing the waters with the dating apps, which like that's a whole other story. But I was finding it really difficult to find any, somewhat leftist men initially, who were not already in an open relationship and whatever. So I was feeling kind of like, oh, just kind of out of sorts. And I went to this vegan conference, and I had someone say exactly that to me. They were kind of pitching, hey, I'm thinking about giving this talk at like the next conference. Like, do you want to hear my ideas? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And then they launch into this thing about how if we're vegan, then we should be against monogamy, and you can't be vegan if you're monogamous, for the same logic. Like, we're against caging sentient beings, so therefore, we should be against monogamy, because the idea is that your partner is in a cage. And to this person, to this person's
literally,
credit,
I lock my boyfriend up at night. I don't know about you guys.
no, yeah. To this person's credit, they read the room. They were like, I can see that I'm losing you with this argument.
That's
But
good.
I was kind of like, yeah, I have to just go to the bathroom now. But yeah, I was like, oh my God, it was like that meme of Ben Affleck just like holding the cigarette outside, like, oh. I was just like, come on. Because yeah, I'm in a monogamous relationship right now. My partner is not in a cage. Like, I am not holding a gun to his head, making him respect the boundaries of our relationship. Like, the boundaries of our relationship are what we have come to and developed together. And either one of us could choose, like, if either one of us was feeling like, this doesn't work for me, I want a different structure, we're free to leave. Like, we don't have to stay in a structure that we don't want to be in. We don't have to be in a romantic sexual thing together. And yeah, it's like, like, this is just a boundary at the end of the day. And yeah, I don't know. I find it really difficult in kind of those situations, right? Because it's like, because people are just like, okay, well, what if, it's like, okay, what if he didn't want that? Like, what if he didn't want you to leave, right? Like, what if he wants to be with you, but also to see other people, right?
Oh my God.
And I'm like, okay, but wait, like, so I should be prioritizing the wants of this other hypothetical person,
yeah.
this hypothetical person, and what they want from me in the relationship, how they want me to show up in the relationship. I should be prioritizing that over what I want and feel comfortable in a relationship, out of some weird fear of like, I'd be putting them in a cage if I ask them to respect a boundary, or if there's a consequence, like me leaving, for me, me not feeling like the boundary has been like what? I don't know. I feel that's like really dangerous, actually.
Yeah, I agree. And I picked up on a lot of predation in the vegan community around things like this, because there's this constant pressure that you had to be down for like basically no boundaries ever in order to be a real comrade or to be a real vegan. And the logic that's being used, like the logic that you just said about that person regarding monogamy, is the same logic that then every vegan should be anti-abortion, right? But most vegans aren't, because we know how to like think about what we're actually saying in regards to people's bodies and their autonomy and the boundaries that they're allowed to set for themselves. So it just frustrates me so much, because in these spaces, it's not just like, oh, let's have a philosophical conversation. Like, this is something that occurred to me the other day and I just want to talk it out with somebody. It's like, you're bad and you're doing harm if you want these things for yourself, which, and again, it doesn't surprise me that this comes out of a lot of vegan spaces, because vegans love nothing more than to control someone else's body in my vast experience in the space. And there is a lot of, once you get into a situation, I think this applies a lot to polyamory. I think this applies to kink. I think this applies to veganism and anarchism, communism, all of it, is when you get into a space where people are oftentimes young and inexperienced, very passionate, and have just discovered things that have like blown their brains, and they're trying to figure out like, what do I do with this information? And then you have people coming in with these kinds of scripts. That is very dangerous, because you're going to have a lot of young impressionable people who are like, okay, I guess that's what the truth is then. Like, I guess I have to be polyamorous. And beyond, like, if it was just being presented as polyamory as an option, and education about what that is and what that looks like in an ethical way, that would be fine. But that's usually not like the tactic, right? You're not going to get someone that upset and take that strong of a position and then present them with like all of the information and all the choices that they might need. You're going to present things in a very specific way, which again, from what I've observed, is to have no boundaries, which is very dangerous for everybody, and especially for young people. I think young women and young queer people who don't have the life experience to know better yet. And I was lucky when I suffered the worst predation from someone in the vegan community. I had a lot of awareness about polyamory and how it was supposed to work, and ethical non-monogamy and all of that. And I was able to pick up on the red flags and just be like, no. But I was thinking about it, and I was like, even when I was younger, I wouldn't have known to protect myself from this person. And, you know, I think I found out later they had done this to a lot of other people. So this is what, you know, I meant in the beginning when we wanted to have this conversation, because we want young people now who are entering these kinds of spaces to hear this and be able to determine what the red flags are, and to just have the backing of knowing it is okay if you don't want to do something with your body. Like, it's wild that we need to explicitly say that, but it does need to be said, sadly. Like, you do not have to do anything with your body. And yes, you may get into situations where what you want doesn't match what someone else wants, and that may cause you to have to end the relationship. But like, that's life. You may not want kids and someone else may, and that might end the relationship. You know, you may want to live in a certain country and someone else doesn't, and that might end the relationship. There's no reason that these things have to be that much different than anything else you would negotiate in a relationship. Except it benefits, and I'm going to say it, mostly men, to convince young people, mostly women, that this is, you know, something that they're supposed to do. And oftentimes it's coupled with a lack of communication, a lack of clear boundaries, and the understanding that anything goes. So there can be no critique, or there can be no conversations where it's like, hey, that made me feel bad. Which, if you know anyone who's polyamorous, they'll tell you all they fucking do is talk. They're like, we talk more than we fuck. Like, everyone's talking about stuff all the time. There's like a joke that like, if you want to have more sex, the last thing you want to do is be polyamorous, because all you're going to do is talk all the time, which is very funny. But yeah, there's this idea that like non-monogamy means just fucking everybody all the time without needing to negotiate boundaries or talk about anything. And that's actually the opposite of what good non-monogamy looks like.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would say even casual dating should be that way. To me, casual dating and non-monogamy are close. They're different, but they're pretty close. And I think like, yeah, if you're out and you're casually dating, like, same thing. You should be really communicative to the people you're dating and very clear about like where you all are at any given time.
Yeah, I just agree so much with everything that you said. And I think to me that gets to the root of my problems with a lot of these conversations, is that I think people often fixate on the labels of oh, monogamy bad, polyamory good, or I don't know, abolishing monogamy inherently good. But I don't think it's about what structure you have, relationship structure, because I think both can be amazing and both can be terrible depending on the context. And I think it's more like the underlying values and ethics in which you are engaging in those things. And I think those kind of conversations are rarely ever had. And so oftentimes I feel like people engage in polyamory in a way that replicates patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, because, for example, when it comes to polyamory, a lot of the time it's a lot more about how, I don't know, consuming more experiences, consuming more bodies, accumulating, like, yeah, different sexual experiences, or and also a way to have a kind of emotional repression and emotional detachment, which we know capitalism and patriarchy is based off of so much alienation from ourselves and from each other, and from alienation from deep feeling. And I think a lot of the time it can be a way when you have lots of different relationship structures to avoid the kind of emotional vulnerability and attachment that can come from like just one person. Because especially if you have an avoidant or anxious attachment style, it can be easy to want to develop multiple connections so that if one leaves, it's okay, you have many others to like depend on. And then, yeah, like you were saying, Nicole, with the patriarchy and the desire for, yeah, to fuck more people, and that like enhancing the status of men by like how many more notches on the bed do they have. And yeah, and I think it also can also contribute to this like disposability culture where people, I don't know, kind of, I guess we're always taught to think about always wanting bigger and better and more and never having enough. And just, yeah, like always thinking about people as being replaceable. I'm not saying obviously this isn't the case for all polyamory and then non-monogamy. There are many very ethical ways to do it, like I said. But sometimes what I'm trying to say is if you don't tackle like your underlying values, or you don't ask yourself um, first how you're dismantling these oppressive systems within yourself and how you're relating to others, then it can just mean that you end up having these relationships that are just replicating the same things. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like, I don't think it's about monogamy or polyamory about like against each other. I think it's like, are you dismantling these oppressive structures within yourself, and how you're relating to others within monogamy, and are you doing the same within polyamory or whatever relationship structure it is? I think it's like the same questions need to be asked of yourself regardless of what relationship structure you're engaging in. And yeah, it's kind of how we talked about sexual liberation often being like jumping straight to sexual liberation as like more and more just having more and more sex without actually questioning like how we're relating to like how we're having sex, or have we like done the underlying work. So yeah, I think that's like a huge aspect of the problem.
Yeah, I really want to shout out Cat Black, just like times infinity forevermore.
Yes,
I yeah, I watch so much of her stuff, and she has a whole new channel, Cat Black 2.0, where she just cleans stuff around her house or her partner's house and talks about stuff. And she's polyamorous, and she just has so many incredible insights about, you know, all of this and monogamy and whatever. And she's had so many experiences because she's just always out. Like she's just a social butterfly, and she's kind of like seen it all. But so she defines polyamory, and so do, you know, Connor and Brittany. I've brought them up before. They have you know, a non-monogamous channel, and it's very good. I watch it often. They also have like a non-monogamous family channel. But, you know, they define it as being able to be in love with more than one person and being able to have, you know, committed relationships with more than one person. So I feel like we're kind of entering the territory of just like, you know, talking about the mans, you know, the men's out there who are adopting, you know, adopting this label of polyamory or ethical non-monogamy to do some really unethical shit. So so for example, Cat Black, and she just put up a video about this too, but she talks often about how she'll often see men, usually cishet men, end up, you know, pressuring or convincing their partners to open up their relationship, because doing so would make them, you know, not progressive, not adventurous, not open-minded, a prude or whatever. Basically just to use it as a way to just shop for a new partner and end up just finding, you know, a younger, hotter partner to then just leave and be monogamous with in a new monogamous relationship. And yeah, I mean, I've definitely, you know, seen that, or definitely, you know of a lot of instances where that happens, where it's like, you know, they're using this label of relationship anarchy to basically just mask their womanizing, right? So like, you haven't done the work to actually dismantle misogyny and all of that in your mind. You're kind of just using it. There's also a really popular, I might want to name them, but there's like a popular couple, I guess, who are on YouTube, and they,
Girl.
yeah, whatever. They talk about sex and relationships and whatever. And they're non-monogamous. They're in an open relationship. And the man in this situation, I just feel, is so problematic. He did a video where he was talking to his exes, and basically, you know, talking about the reasons that the relationship failed and whatnot. And he was kind of laughing and talking about all these situations where they would go out together, or they would go to a party together, and he would end up like flirting with other women, or like kissing other, you know, just cheating, or just being a general like misogynist creep. And then he kind of just laughed it off and was like, haha, like at the time I just didn't know that I was non-monogamous, and like that's just who I am, you know? And it's like, no, you're just a cheater, right? Like there's a difference between being like, there's a huge difference between cheating and like actual polyamory, like actual ethical polyamory. And I see a lot of men who seem to not know the difference. Again, like I follow, like, you know, I don't know, I follow like random people on YouTube, or it's like I'll watch one of their things and then I'll end up seeing all their posts, you know. And a lot of people post these polls to get more engagement for their videos. I don't know if people are seeing that or not, but I have like
Oh,
polls.
we should do that.
Yeah, we should do that. But yeah, there's just polls all over my timeline. Anyway, so this guy had posted this poll about like, would you leave someone if they cheated on you or something? And most people were like, yes. And then he wrote in the comments, oh, well, I just don't understand this because I'm polyamorous, you know? And luckily everyone kind of like went off in the comments being like, dude, you can be cheated on in a polyamorous relationship. Like
Absolutely.
like just saying that you're polyamorous doesn't excuse cheating. Like, what are you talking about, you know? But a lot of people will just use it, as you said, as this way to be like, well, yeah, I just have no responsibility to anyone and like no need to communicate, and you know,
And I
whatever.
feel like that's the context I often hear polyamory presented in, is like hypothetical situations, or talking about real couples where cheating ended the relationship, and saying like, oh, this is so sad because if this couple was just polyamorous, then this wouldn't have happened and they could stay together. And like,
Yeah.
why should cheating be the end of a relationship? It shouldn't be that big of a deal. And it's like, yeah, first of all, polyamorous people can be cheated on, non-monogamous people can be cheated on, because again, you have boundaries, and cheating is about breaking a boundary. It's not even necessarily about sex or jealousy. It's about, and it can be intertwined with those things, of course, but like it is fundamentally about like, whether it was explicitly communicated or not, and this is where, you know, conversations could happen. This is where I think couples counseling maybe could help. Like sometimes people just are on different pages and have not explicitly talked about things, and that's where things can go wrong. And a lot of times that can be fixed. But for a lot of people, it's like, I felt I understood and I trusted you that we had this type of relationship with these boundaries, and then you broke that, and now I don't trust you. And that is really the crux of what breaks a relationship over cheating. It's not the sex itself, it's the breaking of the boundary, and it's the destroying of the trust. And yes, like if you think that you're monogamous with someone and they sleep with someone else, like you're allowed to be upset about that. You're allowed to be hurt. You know, it's okay. It doesn't mean that you're a jealous monster and that you need to process like your feeling of ownership over someone else's body. It's okay to be hurt. Even polyamorous people, the good ones who will be honest about their process, a lot of them will say that they struggle with jealousy. It's something they have to constantly process it may get easier over time, but like it's still something that you're constantly navigating, and in the beginning especially it can be a little tough. So I think like to vilify someone who decided to have a monogamous relationship structure and then felt betrayed and did not want to continue that relationship over an affair or whatever,
Mhm.
I just think it's counterproductive, and it feels a bit like bullying to me. It's like I don't,
Mhm.
I don't understand. There's so many ways in which we can be in a relationship with someone, any kind of relationship, and have our trust betrayed, and we're allowed to process that,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
feel upset.
mhm.
So it's very weird and kind of borderline abusive to me that it's always portrayed as this thing is that shouldn't matter, and
Exactly.
that cannot happen to a polyamorous couple, which is just not true.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah, like, going back to this man I was talking about, this popular
It's
creator.
like if you know, you know.
That's what really bugged me so much about, like, watching this video of him talking to his ex, because it was just kind of, like, shirking all the responsibility of,
Mhm.
like, the cheating or, like, the shitty behavior, and making it seem like, "No, no, 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 like, I'm the progressive one here, like, I'm the one who's just inherently, open and whatever, and
Mhm.
Right.
actually, it was your expectation of my fidelity, which was the oppressive structure that I just couldn't live up to because, who the hell
Mm.
can, or it's just so unreasonable. And so it just kind of like, it just puts it all on the other person of like, oh well, like, it wasn't my fault, like, you were just trying to be monogamous with me. And it's like, well, you shouldn't have made that commitment then if you weren't going
Right.
to honor it. And if you didn't want to honor it, you should have communicated that with your partner, and like let them choose, is this a boundary that you're okay with? Because if you're not okay with it, then you have the choice to leave, right? Like, don't like keep them in this place, not communicate with them, and then transgress their boundaries, and then tell them that, like, oh
It
well,
was
this is
their
just
fault.
yeah, like
Yeah, and for the record, probably 90%, I don't know, I'm pulling a number out of my ass, but like the majority of polyamorous people I know would not go to a party with their partner and then make out with other people. Like,
Mhm, mhm,
usually when you're doing something together, that one of the boundaries is that you're together. You're doing something together. You're not like running around hitting on people. Now, some couples, absolutely, that would be part of the fun. But again, it's just this idea that like polyamory is this one uniform, like free for all, and that's all it is. And it's just really, it does a disgrace, I think, to both monogamy and polyamory to talk about these relationships in these ways.
mhm,
Because I see any romantic relationship of any structure is really a test of how far you've come as a human, how much introspection you've done, how well you can communicate, how much like you've processed childhood trauma and past traumas. Like, it is, both structures are enormously challenging in a good way in those ways. And it's really just down to the fine details of like how they work. Because even monogamous people, like some monogamous people think kissing is fine and don't consider it cheating at all. Some people do hit on other people like at parties, and they just think it's fun and it spices them up to go home together. Like, there's a huge range, and then there's other, like, I've been in what I would consider very toxic, unhealthy monogamous relationships where, like, even me having a best friend or a close
mhm.
friendship was considered cheating.
Yes,
So
yep.
there's a huge range. And that's why I think one of the points we wanted to make today is this, even this binary between monogamy and polyamory is like a false binary. It's really a spectrum, and no matter what relationship structure you choose, it should be intentional and it should be well communicated. And it doesn't have to be all at once up front, but like you should be in a constant state of communication with your partner or partners about, how things are going, how you feel, and if things need to be negotiated. Another, like with polyamory, a lot of people have rules about like, don't sleep with my family, don't sleep with my best friend, or don't date my best friend, because it is very important to have your own support system and have that safety net of like, if things go wrong here, I have these people who are just in my corner and, aren't involved with you. Um, and that's not owning someone, that's not putting them in a cage. It just makes sense. It just makes good sense that you'd want there to be people who are safe and just on your side and not complicated by having slept with your partner. Yeah, and that's something you would talk about, you know? You should talk about everything all the time. And I think part of the problem with monogamy is that there's this idea of these expectations, and so many, even of my good friends, like, are in relationships where they haven't talked about the most basic fucking things, and they just get married and it's just off to the races, and then everyone's like chewing down this hidden resentment because they didn't talk about the stuff that they wanted because they were afraid that the relationship would end, which it probably should have, you
Yeah.
know? I have a friend who did not want kids. It was one of the things we bonded the most deeply over in our friendship, and she married a guy who wanted 5 kids, and they never talked about it. And she ended up with
Wow.
like 2 or 3 kids, you know? And it's
Oh,
like,
wow.
what the fuck? Like, you know, and that has nothing to do with fucking other people. Like, there's so many things that can be deal breakers, and there's so many things that you have to talk about and negotiate when you're pairing your life up with somebody, and or several somebodies, you know. It's like, it's all stuff that needs to be constantly processed, and it's all stuff that challenges, like, how, to Catherine's point, how do I show up under the cishet patriarchy, the capitalist cishet patriarchy? How am I showing up as a person who has done work on themselves and wants to be bonded to other people? And what more work do I need to do that in a good and healthy way, in a safe way for everyone? Whether you're monogamous or polyamorous, it doesn't matter. Or ace arrow, or any other thing, you know. It's like, it's still something you have to process, because we've all been taught to be shitheads under capitalism, and a lot of us have a lot of trauma, and you know, it's our lifelong work to kind of like wade through that so that we can show up for other people in the healthiest way possible, and for ourselves.
Yeah, I I just wanted to go back to the example of that YouTube couple that we were talking about, and also the thing that you brought up, Nicole,
This is
about
like
how
secretly a reaction video.
I know. I'm like, DM me if you know who I'm talking about. Or we'll talk about it on Discord.
Yeah.
but basically, and also Nicole, what you were talking about with a lot of the time people being gaslit about being cheated on, like, oh, you just weren't open enough. I think that one of my problems with the way that we talk about polyamory or critiques of monogamy is that it's just so easy for people who are invested in being like a pick me or cool girl or manic pixie dream girl or whatever, to get sucked into non-monogamous types of relationships, because I think it's very easy to want to be like, yeah, I'm down for anything. Yeah, I'm cool. I want this person to be really attracted to me, and I don't want to be like needy or clingy or like all these like traditional patriarchal ideas of and sexist like stereotypes of women in general. And I've definitely felt like that as well. I think I mean, I am still open to the idea of like non-traditional relationship structures, but I definitely think a lot of it also comes from the fact that I just want to be more like desirable or like open or interesting to kind of to the male gaze. And I think that can often be like really dangerous. And I don't think it doesn't surprise me that a lot of the people online, like YouTubers that I've seen that have gotten into these kind of relationships, come from a background of having really abusive or unhealthy partners that they just split up from, like this YouTube couple, also this other YouTube couple. I'm not saying that like their desire for those relationship structures are just because of the abuse that they experience or the unhealthy relationships they experience, but it does seem to be a common pattern. And maybe it's also kind of, if you're in that place of trauma and you're like anxiously attached and you don't want to lose that person, you feel like you need to kind of be down for all these things and be the cool girl and whatever. And yeah, back to that specific YouTube couple, I think one of the things that I've noticed from their videos as they evolved is how much the fact that they're open then also leads to so many other things being open that I don't feel should be, in the sense that basically like he didn't turn up for the birth of her second baby, and like she was apparently okay with that, and there doesn't, apparently that was talked about, and but I just don't think there's a way that you can really justify that. I mean, unless there's like a real like reason for that happening, but it didn't seem like there was like a, you know, like significant enough reason. And I don't want to judge what people do, but I really judge that. I just do. And I feel like that it just annoys me because it kind of feels like, yeah, a lot of the time you're like, okay, yeah, I'm open, but then that then leads to like, okay, yeah, we're having this open relationship, but now I have to also be open to the fact that you won't be there at the birth of my baby, and I also have to be open to this and that and that and that, and then it just becomes this kind of vicious cycle that you've like gotten yourself into, which can be really unhealthy. And then this couple also said that they had a kind of relationship structure where they decided that, like, yeah, if one of them found someone better, they would both be totally fine with them going off with the person who is like better for them. They would just accept that, like, oh, that's fine, that's part of the relationship, you know, we don't want to hold each other back. But it's not that I'm inherently against that. Of course, if I'm in a relationship and I find someone totally better, maybe I would want to go for the better one. But it just goes back to the point I was saying earlier about this kind of encultured emotional detachment that we have, or this constant disposability, replaceability culture that I find really problematic. Because I think, yeah, there are good ways in which you can replace people, but there's also like having that constant feeling that you could be, yeah, that you could easily be exchanged for a better version is I don't know, that would just leave me feeling like shit like all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you know, in the reverse too, I think a lot of couples who practice polyamory or non-monogamy in that way also treat the people they're sleeping with as sort of objects as well. And from what I've observed from my friends who are polyamorous, like, it is not about not connecting with other people. It's actually about deeply connecting with other people. It's about the excitement that you feel when you connect with someone else and wanting there to be the space to explore that fully. But people who are like this this couple sounds, it becomes, yeah, this way of just being detached from everybody, even your chosen primary partner, and that's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is still to find deep connection. It's just to have it be understood and clearly communicated that you might be finding that deep connection with several people or multiple people, or you may have a throuple, or there's, you know, so many different ways that this can present. And even with non-monogamy, which can be more about just like physically connecting with other people or having more physical options, it still shouldn't be about like just using someone else's body. You know, you see that a lot on the apps when you see people who are say that they're non-monogamous, and it's like, oh, I just want to like fuck, and there's this idea of like, do you just want to meet to hook up? And it's like, I guess that's fine. We've talked about that before in the past of, you know, obviously whatever people want to do with their bodies is fine, but this kind of hookup culture can be a little difficult when you're like, well, I still want to like have a drink. You know, I still want to like connect in some way and like feel as if I'm a human to you, even if this is not going to turn into anything significant. And even, you know, sometimes the way that polyamory is practiced with like a primary can sometimes mean that like other people are devalued. I'm not critiquing it. I'm just saying like there's just a lot that can happen. It's a very wide range of things that you are constantly negotiating. And I think really thinking about how you're treating your partner and how you're treating all your partners, whether they're casual sexual partners or romantic partners or whatever they may be, is still a big part of polyamory, and connecting with people is still a big part of it.
Yeah, that reminded me of another YouTube couple that I follow who talk about non-monogamy, and one of the rules in their relationship was that when he slept with people, he would always he was only allowed to sleep with people if he filmed what happened, but it was like in the context of he was a DJ, and so he would be, you know, filming his he would be doing like at the club or whatever, and so he would often meet people. But then I'm thinking, okay, so you're meeting people who are probably on drugs or they're drinking a lot, and then you're taking them home, and then you're having them consent to this being filmed, and you based off of that, like, can you really consent when you're like intoxicated or on drugs? And then also, like, I just can't imagine the idea of someone asking me to like film. I mean, I don't even like the idea. I could see myself wanting to be filmed if I was like really trusted the person, but someone that I only just met, and then that could like end up on the internet, and that could ruin my life or my career, whatever. It just then
it feels very controlling to me too. It feels like the girl is still insinuating herself in the situation.
Yeah.
Just because we're open doesn't mean you need to be able to watch me have sex with people. You know what I mean? And it does create a big barrier to being able to hook up with people if you're having to ask them to be able to record them, which they should not have to. I should not have to consent to being fucking recorded for a one night stand. Are you out of your goddamn mind? There is no fucking way. And I just, when you told us that story, I was like, that sounds like someone who's not actually okay being open, but has like, this is her way of dealing with the fact that she's not okay with it.
Yeah, and she said that she would like find it turned her on and she would get off on it. But then it's like, can that person who's being filmed really consent to the fact that his partner, who isn't like in the room at that time, like is going to get off on that?
Or like watch, but no one should have to like have themselves filmed by a fucking stranger.
Yeah, and then also another very common thing that I see a lot is where there will be a rule like, oh, you can't stay over the night if you're hooking up with someone, or they can't stay in the same bed. But I've never had an experience with a man where I've enjoyed them throwing me out at 2 a.m. in the morning. I'm sorry.
Well, and that's what I meant. Like, that's part of what I meant with the non-monogamy and like how you treat other people. It's like, just because, maybe you're not wanting to have multiple relationships doesn't mean you should throw someone out of your bed at 2 a.m. That's just rude.
And this couple, this filming couple, he also had a rule where she was bisexual, or is a bisexual. She's allowed to sleep with women, but she isn't allowed to sleep with men. Which again is like, it just seems very like,
it's so patriarchal. It's so gross.
The cishets are not okay.
Oh god. Yeah, I think Kat posted about that too, where it's like, a lot of men, it's like they want to be open, but they don't want their it's a one dick policy. You can be open with women, but you can't be open with men, which is just like the most oppressive patriarchal bullshit ever. But so I wanted to bring it back to a couple of things. So first, in terms of like the primary, secondary kind of thing. So bringing it back to Connor and Brittany, I think this is just a good example of like how there's boundaries in all relationship structures. So basically they, like Connor wanted to have like a primary relationship with Brittany. And they still like, I think that they practice it very ethically, and I think that they don't like objectify other people, and like they did talk about like having really good connections with other people, and I really like listening to them. They seem very, very, I don't know, open and like in tune with how they're feeling, and it feels very like positive. But anyway, so they moved into a house together. They have a kid. And then Brittany ended up meeting a partner. Like Brittany didn't really want the primary structure. So she actually wanted like, her vision was like in this house, like you would have like multiple different people living together, and like different people would be partners with different people. And it would be much more fluid. Yeah, I know.
I mean, just living with other people really is
I know, seriously. But so anyway, she got this other partner, Bridget, and Bridget moved into the house that Connor and Brittany were sharing. Very quickly Connor just felt like this really isn't what I want, and so it was like a sad, like, I was watching their videos. They had like this really sad video where they were in the car and they were talking about like Connor moved out of their house, and like they were crying and stuff. And so like it's like people in all relationship structures, like you'll have boundaries, you'll have expectations. Like it's not this idea that you're gonna have no expectations, like no negotiation, like no boundaries, whatever, right? And it's difficult when what you want doesn't match with with what the other person wants, but like, you know, you figure out a different way forward, or you leave the relationship, right?
Right.
Yeah. And yeah, just going back to the idea of like this very often being, and like again, like Kat Black just talks about this a lot, like it very often it's like women on the receiving end of these men who are pressuring them to be polyamorous or like to go against their boundaries and whatever. And I think this like filming story is like really you know, goes along with this. But you know, Kat Black says, which I think is very wise, you know, when has ever allowing a man to push your boundaries, or when has ever,
Mm.
you know,
Mm.
like transgressing your own boundaries to please a man, when has that ever served you? Ever?
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know? And so it's like, if you're in the situation and you feel like you're being, you know, someone's like wanting you to do this thing and telling you, especially if they're telling you you're not open-minded if you don't do this, you're that if you don't do this, because that is like some serious manipulation, right? To really just like take a step back, like hold your ground, you know what I mean? Like, when has, you know, transgressing your own boundaries ever served you, like in order to please another person? So yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, even if you are jealous and even if you do have issues that you need to work through, then you need to go work through them. But allowing someone to override those feelings that you have and just have to stuff it down as like it's your problem isn't fixing the problem. Do you
Mhm.
know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
I've dated people who are very jealous and were abusive with their jealousy.
Yes.
And the solution wasn't for me to go like fuck other people. The
Mhm.
solution was for that person, which they never did, to go like get therapy or do whatever they needed to do to work on their shit to get over like feeling that it was okay to control like my thoughts, you know, and my
Mm-hmm.
feelings. Because it wasn't even about, yes, of course, the jealousy was there over romantic and sexual things, but it was over fucking everything. Like, this person just literally wanted to like own my mind.
Mhm.
And it's like, yeah, opening our relationship up, transgressing his boundaries was not going to fix that. You know, that's not
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
core
Mhm.
issue here.
Mhm.
So, even in the cases, you know, I'm just saying this because I feel like polyamory, as we mentioned before, is so often brought up as the solution to these issues. But it's like these issues are not stemming from monogamy per se. It is conditioning under the cishet patriarchy that monogamy is like, especially for women, is what
Mhm.
should be practiced. But the issues are much deeper than that. And you're not going to, you know, you're just going to make things worse and you're just going to
Mm-hmm.
cause more trauma to the other person, even if that person's in the wrong. Which, like I said, like, I've had partners that were definitely in the wrong with like their jealousy and their expectations. But yeah, like opening a relationship up or telling them that they
Mhm.
uh were like just needed to like let me fuck other people was not gonna fix the situation at all,
Mhm.
and would have frankly been dangerous for me to try to
Yeah.
have that kind of conversation.
And I also feel really like, because I'm someone who, yeah, admittedly, and I've been in some very toxic monogamous relationships. And, you know, growing up as a teen, I was a very, you know, anxious attachment style, deeply emotional Scorpio.
Mm.
So, you
So
know, I
relatable.
was extremely a jealous person. I would say I was a possessive person, you know, in relationships. But I mean, I have done so much work on, you know, my own trauma, my own, you know, journey and things like that. And in my 30s, I feel like at this point, like I'm not a jealous person. I am not a possessive person at all. Even to the point that like if my partner left me for like another person, I would obviously be crushed, but like I wouldn't make that mean something about like my worth, my value,
Mm.
whatever. It would just be like, well, that was a boundary, you know, like whatever, you know. Um, so I kind of resent like the idea that, you know, the only reason why I want monogamy or something like that is that like, oh, I just haven't processed my jealousy, or I just haven't like evolved as a human enough to be open to you know, a different relationship
Yeah.
structure. It's like, I mean, we'll get into some other reasons soon of like why you know, I personally choose this. But yeah, that can be kind of the narrative as well, that like, oh, well, you know, this is only happening because you're jealous, kind of whatever. And I just wanted to address McCartney-Dobbs asks,
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, so some couples don't sleep with anyone else. How is women only more oppressive than no one else? And it is oppressive because I'm like, and again, stemming from this jealousy thing, like for a man and a woman in like a cishet coupling, well, I guess it wouldn't be cishet because the one person is poly or bi or whatever, but for them to be like, we have a one dick policy, how is that not based on jealousy and oppression? And it's like, it's such a patriarchal, like a long-standing patriarchal trope for, again, like men to want to control the sexual fidelity of the woman and have them only sleep with one man, them. Meanwhile, they are allowed to sleep with other women, but their partner is not allowed to sleep with other men. I mean, that's definitely coming from like a deeply patriarchal and like jealous, controlling place, even if it's in a non-monogamous kind of a structure.
Right. And I want to add to that a big part of the reason that this is so offensive and more oppressive is or at least as oppressive, is because this is tapping into the idea that lesbians aren't real or don't count. So there's this idea that like sex between women is just for the male gaze and isn't like real sex, so it doesn't count as cheating. And it's also being fetishized probably by the boyfriend who's like, oh, you can go sleep with women because I find that hot and it sexually stimulates me, whereas like if you slept with a man, I would have jealousy, like that would not be attractive to me because it would threaten me. And that's a huge fucking problem. And bisexual women, this came out with the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, but bisexual women actually face the highest rates of domestic abuse out of like everyone, from men. And there's something to that, there's something to the fact that by not being categorizable, by being interested and open to multiple genders, that really does threaten men and it really does threaten the patriarchy. So to have an open relationship where you're telling your queer partner that they can only sleep with a certain gender, you're controlling their sexuality and you're trying to make it about you and your pleasure and your needs and your wants rather than about them being able to be the queer person that they are. And that's extremely common. I wouldn't be surprised if that couple, like, I don't know, because the girl obviously is fucked up as well. But in a lot of situations like that, there's also the expectation that they'll have threesomes with two women and not two men. There's just a lot of ways that becomes unbalanced and seeks to not. I personally feel it's a way to erase someone's queerness, even though I know that probably sounds counterintuitive because she's allowed to sleep with women, but it's a way to like own her queerness so that she can't own it herself. And it's a huge fucking problem. It's a huge problem. Also, this guy is silly because strap-ons can be everything. So she's not necessarily not getting dick down just because she's sleeping with the girlies, but anyway. But yeah, to answer, I don't know if that was a good faith question or not. Reads a little borderline to me, but that is why, like, that is actually a huge way that queer people are policed by their partners, and it's actually quite violent and usually is tied into a lot of domestic abuse and violence as well.
Yeah. So maybe we can move to kind of like other reasons that we personally choose it. Or yes, Catherine?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Nicole said about the idea of the spectrum, because I totally agree. And yeah, I do think part of the problem, I think maybe we touched on this already, but yeah, part of the problem of having these like very distinct labels of monogamy, polyamory, is that I feel like we then get even more hemmed into those boxes, and it's like, oh, I'm monogamous, so I can't flirt with this person, or I can't maybe I don't know, yeah, have these like for example, my friendships are really often based on a lot of physical touch and stuff that like maybe some people would consider inappropriate for a monogamous relationship, but for me it's normal. And it's like, but because then you're like hemmed into the box of monogamy, then you think, oh, okay, monogamy is practiced in this way, And so I can't have this like level of physical touch with my friends because that's like not, or I can't flirt in the way that I want to, whatever. And yeah, I think then it definitely does like hem people into these boxes. And I think ultimately, I guess the point that I would love for us to get to, I think what might be the most liberated like future ideal would be if we didn't have these like categories all together, and just like people would be able to be born and just sort of float around like chain, like maybe at one point you were more monogamous, maybe at some point that would change, or like, and then it's like you're constantly evolving and changing, and it's fluid, and yeah, constantly and I know there's some people who, I can't remember the name of it, but it's like where you can be perfectly happy monogamous and you can be perfectly happy in a non-monogamous relationship, and you kind of like float between the both, which I guess is probably most people if we are all on the spectrum. But yeah, obviously at the moment it's kind of like, okay, you are either one or the other. It's not really considered the norm to say like, oh, I could be a bit of both, which is kind of where I feel like I'm at the moment. I feel like I could really enjoy both potential structures, or like a non-monogamous structure and a monogamous one. I'm not sure about polyamory, but I think it's the same. It kind of like with the gender binary. It's like I don't know if we really want to create like loads more labels. I think it's great at the moment. Like we need those labels, but ultimately we'd love to abolish gender altogether. Abolish like female.
We've abolished abolish though.
Oh yeah,
That's right.
We want to liberate
yeah.
it. We want to liberate it.
Yeah, liberate. And yeah, we would liberate it so that we no longer, we don't even have to say we have to fit into one or the other. We can just like be born, and then like, and I don't know, I think a lot of the time, we're trying to like be boxless, not just create new boxes.
Yeah, I know a lot of people don't trust someone who's been non-monogamous to then be in a monogamous relationship. Kind of feels like biphobia to me as well. And I think like what you said, Catherine, makes a lot of sense when you look at like, I think people should have the freedom and the education to try out different things. And I do think that different things work for different phases of your life and with the people that you're around. And even within the monogamous zone of the spectrum, like that can look a lot different. And, I'm the same way. Like I've only been monogamous with people, but I feel that there are circumstances under which maybe like polyamory or non-monogamy would work. And then maybe I would go back to being monogamous. Like it would be nice to have that fluidity and that ability to kind of negotiate and see. For me, I probably wouldn't want to change a relationship structure that I was in, but like if I come into something that is different than what I thought I would want, but it works, like I'd want to be able to explore that. And I think probably on both sides of the thing, actually, I think there's a lot of mistrust of, oh, well, you did this thing before, so that must be what you really are. And how can I trust that you're this new thing now? And it's like, well, people are different, like we're different throughout the phases of our life. We meet different people. And I think one of the things that comes out of like queer rhetoric is this idea that like, to really push back against the thought that if you meet someone, it may change what you thought you knew about yourself. But I think that that is something that we can embrace and explore and not be afraid of. I think there are people who like did end up being queer for one person. I think there are people who thought that they were gay and like met someone and just fell in love and are like, oh, okay, I don't know like what this means. And I think the same for non-monogamy and monogamy. I think like sometimes you can just stumble into a situation where you're like, wow, I didn't think this was going to work, but it does. And yeah, we should all have space to kind of move and flex throughout our life. And I just think the communication is the key, just being upfront with everyone and being treated with respect and feeling safe, like your boundaries are being respected and that the people that you're engaging with are being honest with you and being upfront with you. And I think in that space, like many beautiful things can happen. And that to me is liberating the relationship rather than abolishing monogamy.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, for people who are like, oh, you used to be this, and how do I trust that you're this? I mean, like, even if a person was really monogamous, there's still no way to trust that, like, your relationship's
Right.
going to last forever. Like, maybe in like 5 6 years,
Exactly.
you'll both be like, this isn't working anymore, and we'll get a different a different relationship. But I do know that Kat Black talks about like she doesn't trust when people, especially men, I guess, because she dates men, she doesn't trust when men say that they are quote unquote open to monogamy because she's like, what does that
Yeah.
mean? And
That's fair.
and she's had a lot of experiences like as a Black trans woman where like men will say to her like, oh yeah, I'm super polyamorous, I'm super non-monogamous, like not looking for a serious relationship, not looking to be tied down, whatever, only to then like meet a white cis woman and go start a monogamous relationship with her, and she's like, okay, so like you just weren't like
Hmm.
like you weren't actually ideologically committed to polyamory, like that wasn't something that felt
Mm.
important to you in your life. You just wanted you're just using that label to like date me basically, casually, to just then move on or whatever, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I
I
just
think
think
that's very
that
cool.
I think the apps complicate everything, honestly,
Yeah.
because I just don't trust what anyone says on the apps. And I do think it's okay to have your guard up if you see someone who's like down for anything, or like Catherine, we were just talking about this. It's like, oh, and I think Kat Black has mentioned this too, but like, oh, non-monogamous, but I might be monogamous for the right person. And it's like,
Yeah.
so that means you're gonna do whatever you want, and then you're
Mhm.
gonna have me jumping through hoops trying to be like chosen by you to be
Mm.
monogamous with. But again, I think like the important thing is just, how does that person make you feel? Are there any red flags? Do you feel like the communication is really clear and like honest, and that you're feeling safe with that person? Um, but like I said, the apps are hell.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, it's hard. I think it's hard to find people who are well adjusted, who kind of have that, I mean, period. But
Yeah.
like who have that wishy-washy sort of profile where you're like, okay, you
Yes.
literally checked every box of what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And I do think there are some people who that can be true and they're not dirt bags, but unfortunately, a lot of times that's what you get. But I think that's a good rule of thumb, is like, you can have your guard up, or you can even have times when you're like, I'm just going to pass on a profile that says XYZ because I've just,
Yeah.
had too many bad experiences. But I just think like in general, it's okay to, because I've even had that now as someone who's come out as pansexual. It's like, well, how do you know that you want to blah, 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 blah? And it's like, oh my fucking God, like, can we just date and see if we like each other? And if I'm happy,
Mhm.
then I'm happy. And if I'm not happy, then we'll break up. It's gonna have
Mm.
nothing to do with genitalia. It's gonna have nothing to do with gender. It's just, do we like each other and have a good relationship? That's all I want. And I think that's all a lot of people want, is just the chance to be like, can we just get to know each other before
Mhm.
you're putting up walls and like judging me for having perhaps a more spicy and interesting past experience than you've had, or being more open to certain things. But at the same time, yes, like, again, there's a lot of people out there who will use that as a way to kind of prep you to not have good boundaries, basically.
Yeah. Just
Mhm.
watch out for the men's.
Yeah.
Um,
I also wanted to say that I think it's interesting how, like, to think about choice feminism in relation to this as well, because
Mm,
I guess it's difficult because we're often very critical of choice feminism because, yeah, how can you really make a liberated choice if you're conditioned into um, into like doing things that are oppressive? Like, for example, when people say, "Oh, well, it's your choice that you shave your vagina," it's like, well, is it really my choice, or have I just been, yeah, conditioned that I have to do this in order to be desirable? And so I do think I think about that sometimes in terms of monogamy, and like, do I really want monogamy, or have I been conditioned into this? And I definitely think, yeah, that's like a point of self-reflection that I think is good for everyone to do. But I do think that can also be used as an argument to like make people again feel shit about their choices, like, oh yeah, you don't really want monogamy, you're just like, yeah, you've just been conditioned into this. In the same way, I don't want someone to tell me not to shave my vagina because of the patriarchy, so I can make that choice. Like, don't tell me I'm being oppressed because I'm shaving my vagina. Like, I know, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to do it. Like, I know.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think there's no question that I've been socialized to prefer monogamy. There's no question about that.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. But at the end of the day, it's what I prefer. Like
Right.
that's what I want, though.
Well, and it ignores the existence of polyamorous people who have decided they don't like polyamory that much and want to be monogamous. Like, there's plenty of those people out there. And it doesn't mean that they were faking it or that they're, have been brainwashed under the patriarchy. It just means that, like, because of what is entailed in polyamorous relationship structures, they've realized that it's like not for them and that they want something different. Like, that is fine. We're all doing our best, we're all doing our best under the patriarchy. And yeah, like, we may want things that maybe are slightly rooted in something or how we've been conditioned, but it shouldn't override our ability to make those decisions for ourselves.
Yeah, especially when it comes to like what I do romantically and sexually with people, right? Like, if I'm
Seriously.
perfectly happy and like my partner and I are not harming anyone, like that's just what it is. Like, that's just what it is, and definitely like I can do like, a lot of introspection about that and about like my understanding of like romance and like what I find to be romantic. But at the end of the day, that's what I find, that's what excites me. That's what gets me going. So I'm not like really interested in changing that. Like, if I was unhappy, then sure, yeah, let's really work on changing this. But I'm blissfully happy. So like, why would I try to tear that down? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And I think it's also easy to talk about like having like these polyamorous or non-monogamous structures. But if we still live in the context of the fact that we're working all the time, desperately trying to make ends meet and like tired and exhausted from life, etc. And then like we're supposed to also navigate trying to have a non-traditional relationship on top of that, when already like managing one is really hard enough. And there is an argument to be made for obviously prefiguring the world we want to see and like working towards dismantling oppressive stuff and like that and all of that. But at the same time, given the context of life, it's also, I don't, it's just very telling to me that most of the people who practice monogamy, non-monogamy, and have like YouTube channels about it, or that like their non-monogamy is literally their whole entire job. It's like, of course it's going to work for them, but even then it doesn't seem to be working for them, clearly, from what we've talked about. So I don't know, like, it's like, if I could dedicate all my time to the pursuit of trying to make like this relationship, these kinds of relationships work, and that was my job, and I could constantly read about it and learn about it, that would be amazing. I think I could really thrive, but that's not the context of most of our lives. So
yeah, I think that feeds into like the kind of last section that I wanted to talk about, is like kind of like these other factors, for me personally, I think also Nick, that lead to us wanting monogamous structures. So as an autistic person, and Nick as well, and Catherine as well, so, a bunch of autistic people, and also as a chronically ill person, as a spoonie, I spend most of my time alone. I spend like most of the week alone. I will be moving in with my partner soon, and I'm very excited about that. But yeah, for right now, especially like managing the demands of work and like how much time alone and in my bed and in the dark I need to spend just to like regulate my nervous system, to be able to get up and go to, do the work that I have to do the next day. I don't have the physical, mental, or emotional capacity to keep up more than one romantic connection, right? It's just not happening. And I think that, and also, just the way that I am, like the way that I love, the way that I connect, like for me, I guess it takes a lot for me to like trust and like let people in. I guess I would say that's true. I am a Scorpio, but But yeah, so when I actually like do get in with someone, like I go very, very deep with them. And again, like as somebody who is usually very extroverted, like that takes a lot of my energy. That takes like a lot of me. Like so I put my whole self into these connections because I want them to be that deep. But again, that takes a lot. And like as a spoonie, that's all I got. So like for the most part, I have only really been interested in connecting with one person at a time. And I think it makes sense that like if that's what I'm interested in, if I really want to connect with one person at a time, then for me it makes sense to want to connect with somebody who wants the same thing. So like the relationship feels like a balanced thing. Like we're both kind of on the same page there, you know? And like I don't know, yeah, like maybe there'd be situations where I'd be fine with like something else, but I don't know, not really, you know, like that feels good to me. And it fits my life and my lifestyle and what I want, right? So that has nothing to do with like, you know, me processing my jealousy. There's nothing to do with, you know, anything else but me being a real leftist and all this other stuff. Like it's just the reality of my existence. And yeah, maybe if things were different, like maybe if we were living in a communist utopia and I didn't have to work every day and I somehow, you know, healed from from all the stress and the chronic illness that I deal with now, maybe I'd have more, you know, availability for stuff. But even then, like I doubt it because I'm very set in my ways. But you know, just, that's just how it is. You know?
And you're very aware of your boundaries, which is great.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I have a similar experience, you know, and I've been very sick for many years now, but especially for the last like 3 to 4 years. And the last relationship I tried to have, I actually did try to open it up, and it did not work because the other person was more invested in wanting something more monogamous than I wanted. And also, I just found it really exhausting to have a body that was having so many issues and try to meet someone else's expectations who like could not really understand what I was going through. And yes, an argument could be made that like you can meet the right person or persons. And I've, you know, heard from a lot of chronically ill, disabled people who are polyamorous and have multiple partners, and those partners can help them like take care of them, especially the ones that are more able-bodied, and the ones that are disabled, they like try to take care of each other. But for me, it's always been easier and better to just isolate and like take care of myself and to not have the stress of other people wanting things from me that I can't give.
Yes.
I found that really, really challenging the last few years that I was around people. And really since the pandemic, like I haven't dated in like 3 years, and I've been super fine and like pretty happy about it and just focusing on my own stuff. Something for me, and I think this is for Mexi as well, is like my illnesses are very heavily, like I basically have an issue regulating stress in my body. Um, and because of that, it's very hard to be in any relationship that has the potential to like be unstable or have issues. And I don't think it's fair to say to someone else, like, I can't get in a fight or I can't like have, you know, any intense kind of disagreement or whatever, because like I just physically I can't handle it. So I have sequestered myself, I guess, and I've been very happy with that decision. But I think understanding that perspective, like for me, that makes the idea of one relationship has been too overwhelming to even pursue or consider for several years now, not to mention like trying to manage multiple relationships. And then I forget why it came up on the last stream, but I think I went on a whole tangent on the last stream about, you know, also being very concerned with germs and STDs and things like that. And not that polyamory or non-monogamy has to have like such a higher risk, because again, usually the communication is quite good and the protection is quite good. But it's just the idea of like having a lot of people around and having exposure to new germs all the time. It can be really challenging for me. because my immune system just doesn't do well with other people's stuff, and the communication that needs to happen. Perhaps this is a failing of mine as a partner, but like I don't like to talk all the time about like feelings and stuff. I want to have conversations as they need to happen, but I've dated people who are like just want to talk about the relationship constantly all the time, and I fucking hate it. And I think like, I think perhaps that level of communication would need to happen in a polyamorous situation to make sure, just the constant negotiating of boundaries and keeping everyone up to date with what's happening. And I just don't want to talk that much. So I think I would be a bad partner for someone in that respect. Yeah. And also being autistic, I know a lot of autistic people who are polyamorous and it works really well for them. But I think Mexi and I both being hardcore introverts, being generally overstimulated and having to limit like how much, having to regulate the limited amount of energy that we have, it just has felt pretty overwhelming. So I also think like, there's this idea that, for instance, people who are asexual like have to be in polyamorous or like non-monogamous relationships because they don't want to have sex, and that can work for people. But I think I don't know, I guess I'm trying to say like I think this like hyper focus on polyamory and non-monogamy can kind of erase the fact that like there's also a spectrum of romance and sexuality that people feel, and that like people can negotiate those boundaries however they want to have healthy relationships that work for them. But I think to basically tell certain people that they're not allowed to have a monogamous relationship is pretty shitty. Like it's a kind of erasure or a kind of invalidation of your existence. Like you're never going to be enough for someone. So you're going to have to, I've like heard that line a lot, that asexual people like should just be polyamorous. And again, some ace people love that, for some people it works really well, but there's like very extremely romantic asexual people out there who just want to find their one person and like have that be it. And I think that they should be allowed to have that desire and that dream, and be able to pursue that without being told that that is like somehow wrong for them to want.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, especially because it does like it that feels patriarchal to me again, because it just kind of like underscores this idea that like, yeah, you need sex all the time in a relationship, or that like your partner, and I mean like I don't know, like the people involved could be any genders, but I know that like it is a very gendered thing to tell women like, oh, if he's not getting it from you, then he's going to need to get it from someone else. It's like, no, he doesn't need to get it from someone else. Like, what are you talking about? No.
Or if he does, that's our business, not your business. It's like that's something we can talk about. But yeah, and I think like, Mexi, you and I identify as demisexual. And, I think that there is a bit of ace erasure because demisexuality is on the ace spectrum. There is a bit of erasure to assume that like the only reason I want to sleep with one person is because of jealousy, rather than the fact that I'm a triple Scorpio, autistic, intense fucking person who like when I love someone, they're like all I can fucking see, not in a bad way, but like they're just it for me. It's like I don't want to fuck people very often. And when I do, and it's good and the relationship's good, I am so happy. I'm so emotionally fulfilled. I am sexually fulfilled. I'm good. And I want that person around all the time for all the things, like Mexi, we talked about, I want that person to be able to come to my birthday party and to be there for holidays and to go on vacation with. And like, they may be unavailable sometimes because of friends or family. That's understandable, but I don't want someone who's in like 5 other relationships where I have to like schedule what day of the week I'm going to see them. If that makes me jealous and controlling, so be it. I like always become super best friends with the person that I'm in love with. And I just love like talking to them every day and being with them every day. And I just genuinely don't want to fuck anyone else. Like I just don't want to. So I think, I think it's okay for someone like me and Mexi to want to find someone else who is the same way and just wants the same thing. You know, I'm not trying to vilify someone who feels differently. I'm not trying to trap anybody in a relationship. Like if I fall in love with someone who maybe could be polyamorous, but they're fine being monogamous to be with me, then like that's our business. And if we're both happy, then we're both happy. And, you know, I think that that's part of what makes me a really good partner is that I know these things about myself and I pour everything into my partner, not in a bad way, like not in a codependent way, but just in a like, I just think you're amazing and you're a rarity in my life because I don't find this often and I just want to just love you so much all the time and I just don't have anything else to I don't have anything left over to give anyone else. I don't want to, you know. Besides segueing into the rich friendships that I have in my life.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to bring that up because I was like, yeah, because I think a lot of people can be like, oh, but like that's so bad to put all your eggs in one basket and have like get everything. You can't get everything you need from one person. It's like, yeah, no, like certainly I feel like it's incredibly important to have extremely rich friendships, and we all do. I mean, like again, like the three of us are on voice note like all day every day. And I have so many like rich platonic, you know, connections, and even connections that like feel even more than platonic, but they're not quite like I mean, they're not sexual, they're not, you know, but it's like, well, maybe they're verging on romantic, you know, like they're like I have a lot of connections that are just like really deep and rich, right?
Queer platonic.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
It's that thing you can't quite define, but it's very real.
Yeah. And but it's like, yeah, so like I can get my romantic and sexual needs met by one person and then have like a vast array of other connections that meet my other needs, you know? And like that's I don't think that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Catherine, I haven't watched your video yet, but maybe this relates. But I think like friendships have just been under attack for a long time. I feel like they've suffered quite a bit in this like late stage capitalist hellscape that we're in. But, you know, I've read a lot of different articles that say like most people don't even have like one close friend or don't have a group of friends or, you know, don't feel like they really have anyone they can talk to. And so I think in that landscape as well, it's easy to judge wanting one person to be your everything. And I think that a lot of monogamous couples probably are feeling that pressure because they are literally everything to each other because these other relationships have been so lacking. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily the fault of monogamy. It's more an issue of interpersonal connection, capitalism, yeah, and just how disconnected we are for so many different reasons. You know, living in lockdown for several years being one, but also people working so many jobs. Catherine, I think you just brought this up in one of your voice notes, but like not having that, what was it, the third space, like not having somewhere to go that we used to have where you could just be communal. I mean, even like going to college or going to high school, like you have a space that you're going to and you're seeing the same people over and over. It helps you build those relationships. And I think a lot of young people, once you graduate, you just feel super lost, you know, and very disconnected. And I think especially if you're working remote or you're working a job where you're not really like around people a lot, then or the same people, you're not building those relationships, it can just be really really fucking challenging to find people that you connect deeply with to get a lot of those needs met. So I can understand, you know, why people would not like would think that you have to have multiple romantic relationships, but it's like you really just need multiple relationships however you define them. You know, you need friends, you need family, you need lovers, you need partners, whatever it is, but like we all need a plethora of people to pull from, not necessarily a huge amount. Like I am very satisfied with a very small social group. My social group is probably too big right now and it's exhausting, even though I love everyone in it. I'm not willing to get rid of anyone. But yeah, I think, you know, again, if you go to your average person, your average young person saying they don't even have one person that they can like really talk to, like that's sad, you know, and that's so lonely. And that's a bigger issue than what relationship structures we choose for ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then if you
Yeah.
think about, like, I think like older people as well, like I know, you know, like, because as you get older, it, especially in this model where we do have like this institution of the individual family unit, then once you have kids and stuff like that, like a lot of times you will end up, you know, just getting separated from your friends and like ending up just kind of focusing on your own individual family. Because I think about like, you know, my parents and whatever, and you know, they have friends, but like over the years, obviously, like they have fewer and fewer friends. They have fewer and fewer people that they actually go out with and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think that that is mainly the problem of capitalism, and also this idea of like not socializing care work and making, you know, everyone just kind of hyper focus on their own kids
Yeah.
in order to survive, and then kind of like everything else falls away. But you're right, Catherine's video was excellent. Everyone should go watch that video.
Oh, thanks.
But yeah, at the starting, you were playing all those videos of people who are young people saying like, I don't have any friends, and it's like, well, that's, you know, that's also because of alienation under capitalism. But to me, that's even more sad, because it's like, well, it's kind of understandable to me how like older people with like more you know, demands on their time might, you know, lose friendships. But for people who are in their teens,
Yeah.
early 20s, to be like, I have no friends, it's like,
So sad.
shit, man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
like, yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think, you know, polyamory, again, being something that requires a lot of like communication and introspection. I don't think that that being thrown as a solution to people who don't even have friendships, like don't know how
Yeah.
to interpersonally connect, and like don't know how to do conflict resolution, or
Mhm, mhm.
even say like what they want. You know, I don't think it's
Mm-hmm.
probably going to end up making them feel more lonely, if anything, because as we all know, like practicing it in that sort of way where you're like, if you're not finding anyone to connect to, that means you're just hooking up, and like that
Yeah.
can make you feel more lonely if what you really want is that interpersonal connection.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the doing the research for that video was insane, because I had to watch all these videos, and so many of them get millions of views, and I think, and
Mhm.
like the
Mm,
comment sections as well, it was unbelievable to me. Like I think there's a big reason why it's so popular. And yeah, we did that loneliness stream, and apparently in Japan people are Discord call and loneliness, and yeah, Japanese elderly people are actually deliberately committing crimes just so that they can have a social life in prison. The
oh
UK
my
appointed a
God.
minister for loneliness. Like, yeah, it's really, really, really sad. I also wanted to say that for me personally, like I said, I am open to the possibility of like a non-monogamous relationship. I'm also open to a monogamous relationship, but mostly the point I'm at the moment is like I just feel like I have a lot of trauma, and I think I feel like it would just be so difficult for me to work through those things in a non-monogamous situation. And I think like I'm not that obviously a lot of it you should work through yourself anyway, but I think a lot of it, it's not until you enter into a relationship that it comes up and you work through it. And I know you can work through trauma in like a non-monogamous context too, but I don't know, I just think it's a lot more difficult when you have I guess not like maybe one person who has the energy and time or like commitment to you, because they also have other situations going on, and then also just dealing with like yeah, the kind of insecurity of the situation that the situation could
Mm.
potentially bring about, and all of these other factors. And yeah, so I think that I just think a lot of the time, I like how many people are really enlightened enough for I find it hard enough to find even one person that I want a relationship with. I've been single for so many years, and I feel like I've met so many people over the past few years, and there is like basically no one that I've met that I actually want a relationship with. And then to like find like other people as well as that, I find really hard to imagine. But also, I wanted to mention as well that people always talk about the fact that like the idea of specialness, that they
Mm.
criticize monogamous ideas that like, oh, if you sleep with more than one person, that diminishes the specialness of like your current partner. And then they argued that, well, you don't say that about friends. Like you don't say, oh, Nicole is less special to me because I also have Mexi. But like I don't know. I personally, I guess it's different for everyone, but I think to some extent, I would imagine that if I had more than one partner, that like that partner would become less special to me. Just like if I had only one friend as opposed to 10 friends, I think that one friend would be more special. And I guess in the end, like, does it even matter what does special even mean? If it's like you're happy and it's healthy and content or whatever, that's fine. But I don't like the idea that people immediately say, "Oh, it's stupid that you think it's more special that you just have one person to share this with." If that's your experience and you find it really special just to have one person to have a sexual connection with, then that's like great. It's like I don't know. Yeah, I think I would find that really special, like that one thing that you share with that one person. Yeah, so
Yeah, I think a lot of times like purity culture gets should be critiqued because it's obviously
yeah.
super fucking toxic. But yeah, I think sometimes critiquing it overrides like what can be special between two people. And that's how I feel again as a demisexual, is just like it's just so rare for me to find someone that I like having sex with, that I want to have sex with, that I also emotionally connect with. Like that person is a fucking unicorn to me. And I'm okay with telling them that and making them feel special and celebrating that. I think that that's fine. And my friends who seem to be really happy being polyamorous are people for whom I want to be careful because I'm not saying this in a derogatory way, but it's less, I wouldn't say necessarily less special, but it's less rare for them to have feelings for somebody and to connect in that way, or to be very attracted, like sexually attracted to someone, like, yes, I want to sleep with this person. And so for them, like the excitement is in the possibility. Whereas for me, the excitement is in the like stability, I guess, the consistency of like how I feel about that person in our relationship and their presence in my life. Like that is actually exciting to me. And I think some people who are like very inherently polyamorous don't necessarily understand that, you know. I think it just comes out of like, oh, I'm insecure and I don't want to share my partner with anyone. But it's like, no, I just really like have so much joy in this special little unicorn person that I have found. And I'm like just so delighted and happy every day to like discover them anew and to share more things and to get deeper with them. And like for me, that is very joyful and exciting. And that's what I wanted to say in general for whatever you choose, is it should feel really exciting and liberating and good to you. And you know, there are a lot of people who choose polyamory and that's how they feel. They feel like something finally clicked into place and like their life makes sense and what they're doing makes sense. And I think for some people, like that's how monogamy feels, but it's the default. So it's like the work there is getting to a form of monogamy that feels that good and finding the person that you can have that form of monogamy with. And that's my journey. You know, like I haven't found that person yet. I may never, and that's okay with me. But that is probably the relationship structure I want. And that makes me feel really happy to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like the poly people that I know that are extremely happy and who I think are, you know, um, doing things in a way that I'm like, wow, that looks amazing, and that looks like that feels really
Yeah.
good. It's like they've found multiple unicorns. Like they have
Yes.
like really, really, really intense, deep, loving connections with more than one person, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. You know, I've just never had that experience. Like I've
Right.
just never had that like level of like I'm so crazy in love with this person, and I'm also so crazy in love with this other person. Like it's just not happened, right? Yeah, I think what you said is really great about like just choosing something that feels really exciting to you and doing the work to make sure that you are showing up in a way that is again like healthy and present and vulnerable and respectful of these other people as like full beings. Because yeah, if you're going to choose monogamy, obviously monogamy is the default, so you do have to do that extra work of like, is this something that I'm just defaulting to because society expects it, or is this something that I actually feel really suits me, that I feel really happy in, that I feel like, you know, that
Yeah.
I want to pursue? And then, you know, similarly, if not, then like, yeah, polyamory, of course, is an option. And we'll be highlighting that on the next stream with hopefully a really cool panel of people.
Excellent
Um,
segue.
yeah. So do you guys have any other maybe final thoughts before we conclude?
No,
I
I don't think so.
I think for me, I would just say too, of monogamy is that I think part of the work with it is to determine if the things that you're looking for that make you feel good are because you're told that those are signs of a healthy relationship versus like what you actually want. And are you meeting your partner where they're at, or are you trying to fit them into something that you're told that you want? Or even if you do want it, but you think you're right because it's the status quo.
Mm.
So for instance, like if your partner, doesn't buy you flowers and you get upset about that because good partners buy flowers, right, to show their love, but then like, are flowers even something you actually want? You know what I mean? I just think like people do a lot of this stuff where they move from one point to another in a monogamous relationship, checking off the boxes. So even something like getting married, like just because you're in a monogamous relationship doesn't mean you have to get married. So like think about it and think about what you actually want, and do you want it, or do you want it because it would signal to other people that your relationship is legit? Just things like that. I think like you see a lot like couples that might be happy or might be fine, but one person is very stuck on these things and the other person just isn't. And that creates tension where it's like, is this even really a problem? Like, and maybe it is, but I think a lot of people just have these like expectations. And also I hear people say a lot of stuff like, oh, well, we've been together for 2 years, so he needs to propose.
Yes, yeah.
Kind of thing. And it's like, yes, again, like if you want to get married, if you want to have kids, I understand there may be reasons for having a timeline, but I just think a lot of people do that too because they worry about how it looks to other people,
Yeah.
or their friends are getting married or whatever. So I think a big piece of the inner work with monogamy is to like, how do I own this relationship and truly make it mine and my partner's, and like make sure that we fit by what we both want and we're not making each other miserable staying together but like not wanting the same things, and also like being overly concerned with what the capitalist cishet patriarchy is telling us should be the milestones. And I think this happens even with like gay couples. Like I've seen this with my gay friends as well, because it is still being influenced by like the cishet patriarchy determining what a monogamous relationship should look like. So I think like really doing that work, I guess I'm pulling this from like couples who stay together a super long time and one of them wants to get married and the other one doesn't. And you just kind of know that like at least one person is not even into it and probably both people aren't even actually happy. But it's this idea that like, oh, well, now I've sunk 7 years into you, so now like we have to get married because that, you know what I mean? Like we've just been together so long, that's what's supposed to happen next. And you just want to be like, are you actually in love with that person though? Like, are you even happy? Why? Like just break up, find something else, do something else. Anyway, so that's my spiel. That's my auntie spiel about monogamy, is just like, make sure what you're doing is intentional and well communicated. And always be like, not that you have to like beat yourself up, but like just always be like open and exploring. And as you're growing and maturing, like be asking yourself those questions, because it probably will change over time. I used to like really want to get married. I used to think that was so important. I used to have a timeline for like how long I would date someone and if they hadn't proposed. So silly now. And now I'm just like, if I can find someone to like fuck and watch Netflix with, I'm gonna be super happy. Like just like, I don't give a shit if we get married. I don't care if we live together. You know what I mean? It's like it's changed a lot. And just like, yeah, just be questioning like, am I miserable because I'm actually not feeling loved by my partner, or am I miserable because we're not moving in a way that we're told we're supposed to move in?
Yeah, I think that's really good advice.
Yeah.
So, oh, sorry. Do you have a?
No, I was just going to say, yeah, ultimately, neither monogamy or non-monogamy, or neither one is superior or better or more desirable. Everyone's got to figure out for themselves what works. And yeah, just like having a polyamorous or non-monogamous label doesn't immediately equal liberation. So long story short.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think we did a good job covering all the bases. And again, like I think I'll just close by like, yeah, we really wanted to talk about this because there's so many things that like we wish we had heard earlier. Because even when I talked about that experience at that vegan place, and I had other experiences early on as well, when I was like just coming into leftist spaces, where I'd be like at meetups and stuff, and yeah, like people would be there. And basically just assume that everyone in the room was non-monogamous and was like a relationship anarchist and would just like make fun of monogamy and how backwards it was or whatever. And I just be sitting there like, oh yeah, haha, yeah, okay. And just feeling really like, oh my God, you know, like I guess I'm really backwards. Like I guess I'm really conservative and fucked up and I need to change. And it's like, no, and especially for young people and especially for young women entering leftist spaces, like if you don't feel good about a thing, you don't have to act on it, right? You
Right.
don't have to feel like you need to do this thing to be progressive, to be a real leftist, to be anything, especially if men are telling you that this is what you need to do. Just in the words of Cat Black, when has ever, pushing your boundaries, going against the way that you feel ever served you? It hasn't. So just yeah. So yeah, I just want to put that out there. Like, do the soul searching you need to do, figure out what will work for you or what you want going forward. And don't be afraid to draw a boundary, at the risk of being like a prude or not a leftist or whatever. It's ridiculous. And you don't need to do it. So yeah, I think that's that.
I think we liberated monogamy.
I think we did. So thanks everyone for coming. And again, yeah, the next one, hopefully we'll have a very cool polyamory panel for you all to dive more into that. And yeah, just take care until next time.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
See you on the next one.